Hey everybody, welcome to another CS0 Intro to Java Programming video. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of JtextFields and how we can get data from them and use that data stored in variables and use those variables then to draw things to the screen. So this is going to be our first instance of having a GUI actually take something in and use that to inform some of our drawings. All right, I'm just going to do a really simple program that's going to take in a height and width and an X and Y origin, and it's going to calculate the area of a rectangle and draw that rectangle to the screen. Here's what it looks like. All right, you can see that I've got some fields here and with labels associated with them. So I've got a width label and a field next to it, a height label, the field next to it, X origin, field, Y origin, and field. So in the height, I'm going to make it 100, width 100 as well. X origin, I'm going to start it at 50, Y origin at 75. So it'll be 50 pixels over, 75 down, it'll be 100 by 100. When I draw it, you'll see it appear on the screen. And you can also see that it calculates the area right there. 100 times 100 is 10,000, so it's 10,000 pixel area. All right? That's how difficult the program is, and I'm just going to update it. It's going to be 432 by 234. It's going to be at 15 and 15. And you can see it's too wide for my box. And it fits vertically, and you can see the area shows up right there. All right, that's my program. Let's take a look at how it's built. Most of this stuff we've seen before. I'm using just a standard drawing template that I've been using all along. It's a JFrame, it's got an action listener, there's a button, there's a JPanel, we get the content pane, and then we get the graphics from the draw panel, and we draw in the action listener, or in the action performed method. So public class area of rect, it's a JFrame, and it implements action listener. Here is all my instanced variables. I got quite a few of them this time. I got a JPanel called draw panel, I got a button called draw, and I've got 3 int instance variables: height, width, and area. And I've got something new here. I've got something called a point. Point class comes from Java's AWT. This one isn't in the textbook, but I thought I'd introduce it because what it does, it's going to wrap up an X and a Y origin values into one object. That means I just have one variable for my X and Y. And then I've got all my fields: height, width, X field, Y field. I've got all my labels: height label, width label, X label, and Y label. And these are all instance variables. So when I create an area of rect object, that instance will get copies of all of these variables. In my main, I'm doing the usual stuff that I do in main. I'm instantiating my object, and once again, when new happens, it's going to set aside memory locations somewhere in the computer's memory to store all of this instance data and all of the class stuff. I'm setting the size, I'm creating my GUI and setting visible to true. Ooh, I did not set default close operation, exit on close. Want to make sure we do that so that it kills the process when we close it. Oh, I did it down here in create GUI. I suppose it doesn't matter where I do it. I'm just going to do it up in the main. All right, I get my content pane and store it in my container called window. We've done this many times. I'm setting the layout of my Windows content pane to a flow layout so that when I put new components in there, they just flow across a line. When you get to the end of a line, they go down to the next line. I'm going to create my components, do all the stuff with the draw panel that we've always done, create my button. I'm going to instantiate all of my fields, instantiate all of my labels. I'm not going into detail because we already know how all this is done. And then I'm going to instantiate my point. So this one is new. Origin is a variable of type point, and type point is from the AWT class in Java, and point is going to wrap up essentially just 2 instance variables, an X and a Y. and it has the ability to get those and then update them. I'm going to add all of my things to my window. That's a lot of stuff to add, and when you saw when I ran this, there were all those labels and all those fields. They were all added to the content pane along with the JPanel. See JPanel, all of my components and my button. So that's a lot of adding. This is a more complex GUI than we've done before. Then I'm going to register my button to the listener. All right, I've got a method called update variables. And what update variables is going to do is it's going to retrieve data from those text fields and assign them to our variables. So I've got my variables for width and height, and then I've got my origin, and then I've got my area. And I've just got a printf statement here that when I do my calculations and I update these variables, it'll print it out to the console. I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. So width is going to retrieve the text from the text field. Now, JTextFields, that text that's in that open space in the field is actually a string. It's not an int. So what we need to do is we need to parse it to an int. And you might see here, it doesn't say integer parse int there. Well, that's because I'm lazy. See, I'm parsing int many times in this class, and I just thought I'm sick of typing out integer.parseInt every time. I just thought I'd simplify it by typing only parseInt. So I made a method called parseInt, which is going to take in a string, and it's going to return the value from integer.parseInt. I know it seems silly that I'm doing that. I'm putting this in a method just to get rid of this one name, calling that method to this class, but it really did speed up the process, and it makes the code up here look a little bit cleaner. So width is going to get parseInt, so I'm calling on my parseInt method, which is going to use the parseInt method from the integer class. It's going to retrieve the text from my text fields and parse it to an int and store it in our variables. So I do that with width, I do that with height. Now with my origin, I have to use the method setLocation from the point class. So the point class has a method setLocation that'll take in an x and a y. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get those values from those fields. So x field is going to get the text from that and parse it and pass it into the setLocation method. Then we'll get the text from the y field, parse it, and pass it to the setLocation method. So once again, origin is my point object from the AWT class, and setLocation is a method that's going to update the x and the y values. Excellent. Now I'm just going to use those values that I stored in these variables to calculate area. So width and height, which I got from those text fields, I'm going to multiply them together to calculate the area and store it in my area instance variable. So now the state of my instance for this class area of rect is complete. When I call this method, it updates everything, and my whole state is up to date at that point. All right, so that's creating our GUI. That's our update variables. Let's see where that one is actually called. Let's go to action performed. First thing that's going to happen in action performed is the variables will get updated. So I'm going to call in that update variables method, because what I want to happen before I do any kind of drawing here, I need to make sure that all those variables hold values in them. If they don't, they're just going to default to their default values, which is going to be 0 or null for reference types. We don't want that. So first thing that happens in action performed is those variables get updated. In other words, after I type things in those fields, I'll retrieve that data from those fields, I'll make my calculations, and my state will be updated for the instance. I'm getting graphics and storing it in there just like usual. Now, this is kind of a little hack here. You're going to see that in these videos, in action performed, the first thing I'm always going to do is fill a rectangle that's going to be the full size of my panel, and it's going to be at 0, 0. So it's basically going to just wipe out what was there. I'm going to show you what happens if I don't. I'm going to comment that out. Oops, not all of that, just these two. Comment those out, and I'm going to run it again. And if I want to draw the rectangle numerous times, what it's going to do is the graphics context doesn't update. So I'm going to do the width at 50 the height at 50, the x origin at 50, or 14 I suppose, and the y origin at 15. I'll draw it, and you see it shows up there. Now I'm going to update these values because I can do that. I'm going to make this one 200 by 200. Oops, not 50,200. 200. My x origin is going to be at 50. My y origin is going to be at 50. And when I draw again, it just draws it in place over the other thing, which I think is kind of annoying. But this is the nature of the way that we're working with JFrames to start with. So given that we're getting this graphics context in this way and we're drawing to it in this way, we don't have the ability to actually do a formal repaint, thereby refreshing the whole graphics context. We're just drawing new stuff slapped over the old stuff. So since that's the case, I have this little hack in my code here, which is going to set the color to white and draw a white rectangle that's going to fill up the whole entire panel before I draw my actual rectangle. So it kind of makes it look like it's refreshing the entire graphics context. Okay, that's all it's doing. You can think of these two lines as kind of like an eraser. They're erasing away what was on the graphics context so I could, paint the new thing to the graphics context. So I set my color to not white black, set it just to black. And g.drawRect, and here's where I'm going to use the state of my object, or the state of my instance of the area_of_rect class. So I'm going to get my origin here. I'm going to use the origin that is my instance variable. And from that origin, I'm going to get the x and the y. So get x, get y on origin, and I'm going to cast them to ints because they're doubles. I want to make sure that they will work in this method call. You may recall that drawRect requires a bunch of ints. You can't pass a double into it. If I try and pass a double into it, I'm going to have problems. See, I take that cast off. It's going to say wrong first argument type, found double, required int. In other words, this is returning a double. I need to make it an int. And in a previous unit, you saw that we can explicitly force a wider type to an error type with our primitive types. So I'm forcing this double down to an int. So I'm going to get the x from the origin. Now getX is a method from the point class. It will return the value stored for that instance in the x field or x instance variable. So when I create a point, I can make as many points as I want, and each of those points is going to have their own x and their own y. Well, I'm going to retrieve the x from the origin instance, and I'm going to use it for my drawRect. And then I'm going to retrieve the y from my origin instance and use that for my y. Then I'm going to get the height and the width, or the width and the height that I retrieved from those JTextFields to draw my rect. So when I run this, you saw that I can make multiples of the same one. So this is the point for the first instance of point, and the second, and that instance of point got updated. So then it updated the x and y to 50 and 50. So when I updated the x and y to 50 and 50, that instance called origin had x of 50 and y of 50. So when it pulled from those here on the get x and get y, it recognized that it was 50 and 50 when I updated that instance. Okay, if I update it again to 150 and 150 and draw it, it's going to look at what's stored in the x and the y after I updated it. So when I update variables, it calls on update variables, it updates the state of the origin instance, and it's going to retrieve that data from that instance. Okay? So this class is an example of how you can use primitive types as instance variables, ints in this case, and have them interact with GUI components, kind of like in our update variables, in order to use those variables once again in our action performed to paint. All right? So that's kind of putting everything together. The next two videos are just going to demonstrate a new technology. They're going to demonstrate JSliders and timer. Thanks for watching.